I used to think the worst part of Willow Bent Prep was the silence. The you don't belong energy floating down the halls like AC air. But then everything changed in a heartbeat. It started talking back. The morning I'm thinking of, the parking lot looked like a car commercial. Glossy SUVs easing into neat rows while I stepped off the city bus, hugging my thrift store backpack and hoping the strap wouldn't snap. The sun hit the limestone buildings just right, making the glass look like it was holding its breath. Somewhere behind me, a girl laughed too loud. It wasn't about me, until it was. You can smell Willow Bend's money, even when the halls reek of lemon cleaner and printer ink. The trophy case gleams, the jazz band poster shows perfect faces. I keep my head down and count steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. My abuelo taught me that when I was little, sitting me at our upright piano above the bodega while the radio hummed boleros. Time is a friend, he'd say, tapping a clavi rhythm, even when people aren't. Victoria Hayes leans against the music theory door, all smooth hair and polished nails. She doesn't need to say my name. The glance up and down is enough. The tilt of a smile like a cracked seal on a letter. Her friends part, so I must pass through them. Cute bag, one whispers. I breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. And keep going. Mr. Whitman, crisp as ever, nods. Ah, Ms. Morales. That's all, but it feels like a verdict. We start with intervals, but soon his eyes lock on me. Why don't you come demonstrate middle C? 8 bars. We'll keep it accessible. Laughter stirs, fizzing like soda under a lid. I sit at the piano, keys cool beneath my hands. I'm 3 chords in when he lifts a hand. That's enough. The class doesn't laugh out loud, but the feeling rises anyway. Victoria coughs a delighted sound. Consistency is key, and preparation, Mr. Whitman says. The strap of my backpack digs in as I leave. My abuelo's old notebook bumps inside, coffee rings staining the corners. I think of his words. Play like the room belongs to you, then leave it better. At lunch, the story already has legs. Elena got called up. Elena stumbled. Poor thing. I unwrap a torta my mom packed at dawn. Cilantro and lime louder than the whispers. What I never expected was how a small interruption could feel like a verdict. But borders are funny things. They keep some out. They also mark where you begin.
The next few days blurred together. The kind of blur where you don't even notice the weather outside. Just fluorescent lights, the scuff of sneakers, and the steady hum of whispers that seem to follow me like shadows. If part 1 was the humiliation, part 2 was the weight of carrying it quietly. I kept my head down, but inside, I was boiling. Not in a loud way, not in a way that spilled over. More like how water looks when it's just about to reach the boil. Still, but trembling underneath. That's how I felt. At night, our apartment above the corner store felt like another world. Mama came home late from cleaning offices, hands smelling of bleach, hair tied up under her scarf. She'd drop her bag, kiss my forehead, and say, "Mija, you eat?" Like it was the only thing that mattered. I'd nod, even if I hadn't touched the rice and beans she left warming on the stove, because the truth was, food filled the stomach, but it didn't erase the voice of Mr. Whitman saying, "That's enough," or Victoria's smirk that lived in my head like it paid rent. When Mama went to bed, I'd slide out the old piano notebook. Its pages were smudged, some torn, but every note and sketch of rhythm felt like home. Abuelo's handwriting, round, looping letters, sat between the staff lines like secret messages only I could decode. Don't play the notes, play the silence between them. I'd sit at the borrowed upright piano in the church basement across the street, pressing keys softly so the echoes didn't wake the pastor's wife upstairs. That little room smelled of wax and wood polish, with hymn books stacked against the walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine the grand piano at Willow Bend, glossy, wide as a ship's deck, keys so polished you could see your reflection. I imagine myself sitting there, not as the scholarship kid everyone pitied, but as someone who owned that sound. Each night, I practiced pieces I'd memorized from YouTube clips and worn out CDs. Chopin's Nocturnes, Debussy's Clair de Lune, even Bolero melodies Abuelo used to hum when he thought no one was listening. My fingers stumbled, slipped, but I kept going. 1, 2, 3, 4. Start again. At school, I carried that silence like armor. The cafeteria was loud, a plastic tray slamming, forks clattering, but I stayed tucked in the corner, biting into Mama's homemade sandwiches while Madison paraded past with her designer lunch bag. Some kids snickered, but others, well, I noticed a few glances. A boy in band class watching me longer than usual, a girl who usually sat with Madison looking away quickly when our eyes met. Like maybe she wasn't as sure of herself as she pretended. Still, the weight of invisibility pressed hard. Mr. Whitman didn't call me again in class, but I could feel his eyes sometimes. Measuring, dismissing, already sure I'd never measure up. And maybe part of me believed them. But every time that doubt tried to settle in, I remembered Mama's tired smile, Abuelo's words scribbled in the margins, the sound of those church basement keys echoing into the dark. It wasn't about proving something to Madison or Mr. Whitman anymore. It was about proving something to myself, that I could keep walking through those halls without breaking, that I could keep playing even when no one wanted to listen. Silent strength doesn't look heroic. It doesn't make headlines. It looks like worn-out sneakers carrying you past a gauntlet of sneers. It looks like staying quiet when every part of you wants to scream. It looks like a 15-year-old girl sitting in a church basement at midnight, fingers aching, eyes burning, but refusing to stop because music is the only place she feels whole. And deep down, I knew something was building. Like a storm you can smell before it arrives, like a note that vibrates in your chest before anyone else hears it. I didn't know when or how, but sooner or later, the silence was going to break.
The turning point came faster than I expected. On a Thursday morning, our history teacher, Mr. Whitman, decided to spice things up. He announced that students would give short presentations on cultural contributions to American history. Of course, the wealthy kids rolled their eyes. It was just another chance to show off what their parents had helped them polish. When he called my name, I froze. My mind screamed, "Not me, not here, not today." But there was no escaping. "Elena," he said flatly, "why don't you tell us about your heritage?" The way his voice curled around the word made it feel like a joke. Snickers filled the room. I could already picture Victoria's smirk, her friends leaning in for the punchline. My hands trembled as I walked to the front, holding nothing but the worn notebook that had once belonged to my abuelo. I hadn't planned to share it. It felt too personal, too fragile. But at that moment, it was all I had. I opened the notebook, its yellowed pages covered with sketches of rhythms, Spanish proverbs, and fragments of music. For a second, I thought my voice would break, but then I remembered Abuelo's words. Play the silence between the notes. I looked up, my heart pounding, and began to speak. At home, we didn't have grand pianos or tutors, but my grandfather taught me something more important. That music and stories aren't luxuries, they're survival. The class shifted uncomfortably. Some smirked, expecting me to crumble. But instead, I sat at the classroom's old upright piano, rarely used, dusty from years of neglect, and laid the notebook on its stand. For a breathless second, no one moved. Then my fingers touched the keys. The first notes rang out, hesitant, soft, almost like a whisper, but they carried weight. Slowly, the melody built, blending the classical pieces I'd practiced in the church basement with the boleros my abuelo once hummed. The room stilled. The laughter died mid-smirk. Even Victoria, with her arms crossed in mock confidence, leaned forward despite herself. Mr. Whitman, who had expected stammering words and awkward silence, now stood frozen, his lips pressed tightly, as if trying not to betray his shock. I wasn't just playing music. I was speaking. Every note was a piece of my story. The nights mama worked late, the loneliness of being invisible, the ache of being mocked for what I couldn't change. And as the melody swelled, it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like power. When the last chord faded, silence wrapped the room like a blanket. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. Then, from the back, someone clapped. Just once. Then another joined, and before long, the classroom echoed with applause. I lifted my hands from the keys, my heart racing, but for the first time, I wasn't trembling. I had let the music speak, and it had spoken louder than any insult ever could. This was the moment everything shifted. The next day, the halls of St. Augustine High felt different. It wasn't anything people said outright. There were no cheers or congratulations, but the glances told the story. Some students who had once brushed past me without a second look now lingered, their eyes softer, curious, as if they were trying to reconcile the quiet girl they used to mock with the one who had silenced the room with music. Victoria wasn't silent, though. She leaned against her locker with her usual entourage, whispering sharp comments just loud enough for me to hear. "Cute performance, Elena. Maybe next time you can play at the church for pocket change." Her laugh sounded forced, like a weapon she didn't believe in anymore. The smirk remained, but the certainty behind it was cracked. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because silence had become my greatest strength. The more I ignored her, the more she burned. Mr. Whitman was another story. That morning in class, he didn't look at me when he took attendance. For years, he had been the kind of teacher who thrived on being right, who liked to decide which students had potential and which didn't. My performance had unsettled him in a way he couldn't admit. He scribbled on the board with unnecessary force, his back turned longer than usual, as if avoiding my eyes would erase the memory of the day before. But the students hadn't forgotten. During group work, Marcus, a boy from my English class, leaned over and whispered, "That was amazing yesterday. My sister plays piano, but she doesn't sound like that. You should try out for the winter showcase." I blinked, caught off guard. Compliments weren't something I was used to receiving. My instinct was to wave it off. But instead, I just nodded. "Thanks." The word felt strange on my tongue, like letting myself accept that maybe I deserved to be seen. That night at home, Mama listened as I told her what had happened, every detail spilling out in a rush. She had just come back from a 12-hour hospital shift, her scrub still smelling faintly of antiseptic. She sat at the kitchen table, elbows propped on the worn surface, eyes wide with pride. "I told you, Mi Estrella. You just needed the right moment to let them see what I've always known." Her words were enough to soften the ache I'd carried for years. But with new recognition came new pressure. By Friday, whispers of a scholarship recommendation floated through the halls. Mrs. Ramirez, the choir director, stopped me after lunch. "Elena, I heard what happened. I want you to audition for our advanced program. We need someone with your kind of soul." It should have been thrilling, but instead, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. Because I knew the more I rose, the harder Victoria would push back. She had spent years building her reputation as the star of St. Augustine. To her, I wasn't just a rival now, I was a threat. Still, something had shifted inside me. For the first time, I realized I didn't need Madison's or Mr. Whitman's approval. I had my own voice, my own worth. And once that truth is discovered, no amount of mockery can bury it again. The question wasn't whether I belonged anymore. The question was, how far could I go now that I had stepped out of the shadows?
By Monday morning, the buzz had settled into something heavier, like the whole school was waiting for the next move. The story of me playing in Mr. Whitman's class had spread beyond the walls of that room. Even students I barely knew whispered my name in the hallways. Some smiled shyly when I walked past, others just stared. But no one looked at me the way they used to. invisible, forgettable, disposable. Victoria hated it. I could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened whenever someone mentioned me. She doubled down, her comments sharper, her laughter louder, her entourage more desperate to follow her lead. But the harder she tried, the more obvious it became. She was fighting to keep a crown that no longer sat comfortably on her head. One afternoon in the cafeteria, she finally snapped. As I walked by with my tray, she leaned forward and said, just loud enough for the room to hear, "Don't get too comfortable, Elena. One pretty song doesn't make you special." The room went quiet, every eye shifting between us. My old self might have lowered her head and kept walking. But that day, I paused. Not to argue, not to fight, but to look at her. Just one calm, steady glance. I didn't need to say a word. The silence itself was enough. And for the first time, Victoria broke eye contact. That night at home, I sat by the small upright piano we'd borrowed years ago from the church. The keys were chipped, the pedals squeaked, and the wood bore scratches from decades of use. But to me, it was a treasure. I pressed my fingers down, playing softly, and thought about everything that had happened. For years, I had believed worth came from recognition, that if I wasn't praised, maybe I wasn't good enough. But that day in class had proven something I should have known all along. My value wasn't theirs to decide. It was mine. Mrs. Ramirez's words echoed in my head. We need someone with your kind of soul. For the first time, I believed her. Not because I had silenced a room, not because my classmates clapped, but because I had faced their doubt and still chosen to play. When I closed my eyes, I saw Mama working late nights at the hospital, her tired hands trembling as she unlocked the apartment door, yet still smiling as if nothing mattered more than being with me. I realized then her sacrifices weren't just about survival. They were about giving me a chance to find my voice. And I had. The next morning as I walked into St. Augustine High, I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, not the shallow kind that fades, but a quiet strength. People would doubt me again. There would be more Victorias, more Mr. Whitmans, more rooms filled with laughter waiting for me to fail. But now I knew one performance didn't just change how others saw me, it changed how I saw myself. I wasn't playing to prove them wrong anymore. I was playing because music was who I was. And no one, not wealth, not prejudice, not arrogance, could take that away. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful victory isn't loud or flashy. It's the moment you decide you'll never let someone else define your worth again. The cafeteria was loud as always. Laughter bouncing off the walls, trays clattering, sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Elena sat at her usual table in the corner, quietly eating a sandwich her mom had packed in foil, careful not to draw attention. But the attention came anyway. Madison Harrington had made it her mission to remind Elena every day that she didn't belong at Crestwood Academy. And today, the whispers and smirks felt sharper than usual, as if something was brewing. "Look who's eating alone again," Madison said loudly, striding past Elena's table with her entourage trailing behind. The comment wasn't even clever, but the giggles from her friends made it sting. Elena looked down at her sandwich, tightening her grip until the bread nearly flattened in her hand. She told herself the same thing she always did. Ignore it. Don't give them the satisfaction. But then, as if fate had decided the game was about to change, Mr. Holloway, the music teacher, walked into the cafeteria. His presence was unusual. Teachers didn't usually eat there, and Madison's eyes lit up with a cruel spark. "Hey, Mr. Holloway," Madison called, her tone sickly sweet. "Don't you think Elena should play something for us? She does play the piano, right? Or is that just something she says to sound interesting? The words hit Elena like a slap. Dozens of heads turned. Some students laughed, others looked curious. Mr. Holloway frowned slightly, caught off guard. He knew Madison too well. She wasn't suggesting a performance out of admiration. This was bait. Elena's heart raced. She could have shaken her head, refused, pretended she was too busy or too shy. That would have been safer. But the sting of Madison's words, the way everyone's eyes lingered on her like she was nothing more than a spectacle, lit something inside her. She pushed her tray aside and stood. "I'll play," she said, softly, but firmly enough that the chatter died down. The cafeteria fell into a hush. Students leaned forward, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Even Madison froze for a moment, not expecting Elena to accept the challenge so quickly. Mr. Holloway hesitated, then gestured toward the upright piano near the stage at the far end of the room. "Go ahead, Elena," he said, his voice carrying both doubt and curiosity. Every step toward that piano felt like walking through fire. Elena could feel Madison's eyes burning holes in her back, could hear the whispers buzzing like wasps around her. But when she sat down, her hands resting gently on the keys, the noise faded. She thought of her mother's tired but loving smile, of the small church piano where she had spent countless nights teaching herself pieces no one believed she could play. And as her fingers pressed the first note, the air in the cafeteria shifted. The first note rang out, clear and steady, like a drop of water in a still pond. For a heartbeat, the cafeteria seemed to pause. Forks hovered midair, conversations froze. Even the humming of the soda machine faded into the background of Elena's mind. Her fingers trembled at first, brushing the keys like they might slip away from her. But then muscle memory kicked in. All those nights sitting in the church basement, practicing until her fingers ached, all the melodies she had played in secret. Suddenly, they weren't secrets anymore. They poured out of her. She didn't play like Madison, all polished and flashy, with rehearsed smiles and exaggerated flourishes. Elena played with something raw, emotion, grit, the quiet defiance of someone who had carried the weight of being underestimated for too long. At first, a few students chuckled, expecting her to stumble. But as the music unfolded, the giggles evaporated. Heads turned, eyes widened. Even the ones who wanted to laugh found themselves leaning in, caught off guard by the honesty in her playing. Madison shifted in her seat, her smirk fading. She hadn't planned for this. In her mind, Elena was supposed to fumble, stammer, maybe even cry. Instead, she was commanding the room without saying a single word. Mr. Holloway, arms crossed at the back of the cafeteria, straightened, his face, usually unreadable, softened. He had dismissed Elena before, assuming she was just another kid with no training, no pedigree. But now he saw something he hadn't expected. A student who could take a second-hand dream and make it shine brighter than all the privilege money could buy. Elena's chest tightened, not from fear, but from release. Every note felt like peeling away another layer of doubt. She thought of her mother working late shifts, of the neighbors who sometimes whispered about that girl with too big dreams, of Madison's endless sneers. And with each chord, she answered them. I belong. I'm enough. By the time the last notes echoed and faded into silence, the cafeteria was transformed. The same students who had laughed now sat frozen, some with their mouths slightly open. A few even clapped hesitantly, breaking the stunned quiet. Elena lifted her hands from the keys, her heart pounding, her breath shaky, but her eyes were steady. She didn't need to look at Madison to know the truth. She had flipped the script. For the first time since stepping foot in Crestwood Academy, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't the scholarship girl or the poor kid in worn sneakers. She was the one who had made an entire room fall silent, and nothing would ever be the same. The silence after Elena's last note stretched on longer than anyone expected. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, charged, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then a single clap echoed from the back corner. Another joined in, and before long the cafeteria erupted in applause. But not everyone clapped. Madison Harrington sat frozen, her manicured nails digging into the edge of her tray. Her face, usually a picture of flawless control, flushed red. She glanced at her friends, searching for someone to laugh, to sneer, to dismiss what just happened. But their eyes were fixed on Elena, wide with awe. Madison's stomach turned. This wasn't the script she had written. Elena stayed seated at the piano for a moment, her hands resting on her lap. She wasn't smiling, not exactly. It was something deeper, a quiet pride. For years, she had dreamed of being heard, and now it had finally happened. Not because someone handed her a stage, but because she took it. Mr. Holloway stepped forward, his usual sternness softened by something like respect. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if unsure how to address what he had just witnessed. Finally, he said, "That was unexpected, Miss Alvarez. Very unexpected." His voice carried a reluctant admiration, but the words were clumsy, as though he hated admitting he had misjudged her. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. She was amazing. Did you know she could play like that? Where did she even learn? The same students who used to look right through Elena now leaned forward, curious, almost reverent. Madison slammed her tray shut, the sound jolting those closest to her. She stood abruptly, muttering something about needing to get to class early, but no one followed her. Her friends, usually loyal shadows, stayed glued to their seats, too captivated by the memory of Elena's music to care about Madison's theatrics. For the first time, Madison wasn't the center of attention. Elena finally stood, her legs still trembling. She caught a few eyes, some smiling, some stunned, but she didn't bask in it. She simply nodded slightly, like she was thanking them without words, and walked back to her seat. Her heart was racing, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was possibility. Madison watched from the doorway, her fists clenched. The humiliation burned hotter than she had ever felt before. She had wanted Elena to be the punchline, the scholarship kid with no talent. Instead, Madison had become invisible, outshined in the very arena she thought she owned. And in that moment, something shifted, not just for Elena, but for the entire cafeteria. For once, the hierarchy had cracked, and everyone saw it. The girl they had underestimated wasn't weak. She was extraordinary. And Madison? She was just another face in the crowd. The next morning, Crestwood Academy didn't feel the same. The marble floors still gleamed, the cafeteria still buzzed with chatter, but whispers followed Elena wherever she went. Students leaned toward each other in hallways, their voices hushed yet urgent. "That was her? The girl who played yesterday? I swear I've never seen anything like it. She made Holloway stop talking." Elena felt the stares, the sudden attention, but she kept her pace steady. It wasn't arrogance, it was resolve. For once, she wasn't shrinking into herself. She had nothing to prove anymore. The music had spoken louder than words ever could. In English class, a boy named Marcus slid into the seat next to her. Normally, he sat with the soccer team, laughing at jokes Elena could never relate to. This time, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Hey, that was incredible yesterday. Where'd you learn to play like that?" Elena hesitated, then smiled faintly. "An old church piano, mostly by ear." Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "No way. That sounded professional." His words weren't mocking, not even a little. They carried awe, the kind Elena had longed to hear, but never believed she would. But not everyone was impressed. Madison Harrington's absence during first period was loud in its own way. When she finally appeared later, she moved with her head high, lips pressed into a tight smile, as if daring anyone to mention what had happened. Her friends clustered around her, but something had shifted. Their laughter was strained, their loyalty fragile. They had seen Elena do what Madison couldn't, and though they wouldn't admit it, the balance of power had changed. At lunch, Elena found herself sitting at a table she used to occupy alone. Only this time, other students quietly drifted toward her. Some asked about music, others just wanted to sit nearby, as if being close to her carried a strange new prestige. Elena didn't boast. She simply ate her sandwich, nodded when spoken to, and answered with honesty. That's when Mrs. Collins appeared. The respected history teacher rarely entered the cafeteria, but when she did, her presence commanded attention. She walked straight to Elena's table, ignoring the stares, and placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. "Elena," she said warmly, "I'd like to see you after school. I believe we have something important to discuss about your future." The cafeteria went silent again, all eyes darting between Elena and Madison, who sat stiffly just a few tables away. Everyone could feel it, the recognition, the validation, the door opening for Elena, while another quietly closed for Madison. For Elena, it was overwhelming, almost surreal. But beneath the swirl of attention and whispers, one truth settled deep inside her. She was no longer invisible. And that realization was more powerful than applause. When the final bell rang that Friday, Elena lingered outside Crestwood Academy's tall glass windows, her heart pounding with an unfamiliar mix of nervousness and excitement. She had never been called to a private meeting with a teacher like Mrs. Collins. Teachers usually noticed her only when marking attendance, never for her potential. But this was different. Inside Mrs. Collins's office, the shelves were lined with books on history, philosophy, and the arts. A framed photograph of her own daughter, once a scholarship student at a conservatory, sat proudly on the desk. Mrs. Collins gestured for Elena to sit, her voice warm but steady. "Elena, I've taught here for nearly 30 years. Students come and go, but every so often, one reminds me why I became a teacher in the first place. Yesterday, you reminded me." Elena's cheeks flushed. She clasped her hands in her lap, unsure how to respond. Mrs. Collins leaned forward. "You have something rare, not just skill, soul. That's not something money can buy, and it's not something even the finest piano teachers can teach. It's lived, and you've lived it." She slid a form across the desk. At the top, bold letters read, "Virginia State Conservatory Young Artist Scholarship Program. I want you to apply. I'll write your recommendation myself." For a moment, Elena's throat tightened. She thought of her mother working late shifts, of all the years she had practiced in secret, of the countless times she had felt small and invisible. And now, here was a door she had never imagined opening. She whispered, "Do you really think I have a chance?" Mrs. Collins smiled softly. "Elena, you don't just have a chance. You have a gift. All you need to do is believe it." That night, Elena rushed home, the form tucked safely in her backpack. Her mother listened quietly as Elena explained everything, from Mr. Holloway's cruel challenge to the silent classroom to Mrs. Collins's offer. Monica's tired eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "I always knew this day would come. Mija, I'm proud of you, not just for playing, but for standing tall when they wanted to break you." The following week, whispers still filled the hallways, but the tone was different now. Some students offered small nods of respect. Others even asked Elena for help with their own music assignments. Madison tried to cling to her old power, but the cracks in her control were too obvious. Her smirk no longer carried weight. It looked forced, brittle. Even her closest friends seemed to drift, their laughter quieter, their loyalty uncertain. Mr. Holloway was the most shaken. He continued teaching, but his voice lacked its old sharpness.
Whenever his eyes met Elena's across the classroom, there was no arrogance, only unease, perhaps even guilt. He had tried to humiliate her and ended up exposing his own blindness. For the first time in years, he seemed smaller. Weeks later, the scholarship committee invited Elena to audition formally. She walked into the hall, this time not with trembling steps, but with confidence. As her fingers touched the keys, she thought of every moment that had led her here. The cruel taunts, quiet tears, the countless nights of the church piano. And instead of weighing her down, those memories lifted her. The final note rang out, filling the vast hall with sound and silence at once. When she lifted her hands, the judges sat in awe. She didn't need to hear their decision to know. Something had changed forever. Back at Crestwood, Elena no longer needed to prove herself. The lesson wasn't about silencing Madison or humbling Mr. Holloway. It was about claiming her own voice. She realized true worth is never defined by wealth, appearance, or prejudice. It's defined by resilience, by refusing to let others dictate your place in the world. For Elena, the piano wasn't just music, it was freedom. It was proof that she was enough. And for everyone who witnessed her play, it was a reminder, never judge too quickly, because the person you underestimate may carry a strength that will leave you speechless.
Sometimes life places us in rooms where we feel invisible, mocked, or dismissed before we've even had the chance to show who we truly are. Elena's story reminds us that dignity doesn't come from others' approval. It comes from believing in ourselves, even when the world seems determined to make us small. Prejudice may wound, but it cannot define us. In fact, those moments of humiliation often become the soil where resilience and courage grow. What struck me most is how Elena chose silence not as surrender, but as strength, until the moment she let her music speak. And when she did, the very people who mocked her were left speechless. It shows us that true power isn't loud, flashy, or cruel. True power is quiet confidence, the unshakable belief that your worth is not up for debate. So let this story be a reminder. Never underestimate yourself, and never let others' blindness dictate your future. Your voice, your talent, your truth, they matter. What about you? Have you ever faced prejudice or been underestimated? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this video moved you, please hit like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Wishing you strength, peace, and hope on your own journey.